Today I will show you how to replace the wheel bearings on this 2007 Honda Civic, and the steps will be similar for any Generation 8 Honda Civic, like from 2007 and newer. Signs of a bad wheel bearing normally presents itself with a grinding noise. The grinding sound will speed up the faster the vehicle goes. Listen to hear the grinding of the wheel bearing on this Honda Civic. Can you hear it? Notice when I shift the steering to this direction, the sound fades. Let's replace these bearings. The process involves lifting the vehicle and removing the wheel, loosen the axle nut, remove brake caliper and rotor, remove sway bar from the knuckle, disconnect brake sensor, remove strut to knuckle nuts and bolts, remove axle nut to remove the axle, remove the knuckle from the vehicle, knock out the wheel hub, reinstall the knuckle to the strut and control arm back in the vehicle, remove the wheel bearing retaining ring, press out the old bearing, press in the new bearing, reinstall the axle, reinstall the retaining ring, reinstall the drive axle with nut, reinstall the outer tie rod and brake sensor, reinstall the brake rotor and the caliper, reinstall the wheel and do the same for the other side. After both the wheel bearings are replaced, take the vehicle for a wheel alignment and the job is done. I know this process is very labor intensive, but don't let it discourage you from trying. Let's do this. The parts needed are 2 wheel bearings, 2 new axle nuts, but sometimes the old ones can be reused. It's recommended to replace both bearings even if only one is bad. It's optional to replace the snap rings and wheel hub. Place the new wheel bearings in the freezer overnight. There is some science behind it that makes it easier to press in. You will need some specific tools. The most important tool is a wheel bearing press kit. You might be able to rent this tool from a auto parts store, or you can buy your own online. But there's another tool that is even better. If you have a hydraulic press, it's better than the manual press kit. I think I will buy a 20-ton hydraulic press soon. I use 10, 14, 17, 19, 24 and 30 millimeter sockets, ratchets, breaker bar, impact screwdriver, wheel shocks, jack and jack stands, snap ring tool, hammer, wedge, flat screwdriver, map gas, and penetrating oil. It's a lot of tools, but the right tools will make the job easier. Let's start the actual wheel bearing replacement. I will lift the vehicle and place on jack stands. If you do not have power tools, loosen the lug nuts before lifting the vehicle. You should also remove the Toyota logo from the wheel, reinstall the wheel, lower the vehicle back on the ground, apply the emergency brakes, then use the 30mm socket with a breaker bar to break the axle nut if you do not have power tools. If this is seized, you may need to stand on the breaker bar like this to break the axle nut. I have an impact gun, so I don't need to try any of these other options. Power tools make working on car easier, and these battery operating types are convenient. The wheel is off, and I will place it under the vehicle for added safety. I'll now remove the axle nut. Now I'll knock on the axle to break it loose from the knuckle. Now I will remove the 2 bolts holding the brake rotor in place. Now these can be hard to get out. This impact screwdriver is ideal, but I'll show you another way if you don't have this tool. Use map gas or a torch to heat up the bolt here. Then use the correct size screwdriver to fit real well in the screw. I'm using a socket setup, but use whatever you have. The screws are out, and I will now remove the 2 17mm bolts holding the brake caliper bracket in place. The lower bolt is out, and I will use a swivel extension to access the upper bolt. I'll now use this strap to support the caliper bracket on the strut. Now I'll remove the brake rotor. I'll now remove the strut bolts and nuts. The end here is 17mm and the nut is 19mm. It's time to remove the brake sensor, but I highly recommend not to. These almost always seize and will break in here if you try to remove it. I highly recommend removing these clips holding the wire in place, then unplug it and leave it in the knuckle if you want to save this. These are expensive. If you are replacing the brake sensor though, use a clip removal tool and disconnect this retainer clip, this clip for this cover, this clip, then unplug the connector here. I have another brake sensor, so I will show you what will happen if you try to remove this. It will break, trust me. Remove this 10mm bolt. Now I will apply some penetrating oil and gently use this hair hammer to shake it loose. Yes, it happened. It's broken. You can see it here. I will have to use a drill bit to remove it. So for the other side, I disconnected the brake sensor wire and work on it just like this. This is how you save your brake sensor. Let's move on. Remove the knuckle from the vehicle. To do this, remove the safety pin and 14mm outer tie rod nut. If the safety pin is broken, you will need to use a drill bit to remove the remaining parts. I recommend apply penetrating oil, cleaning off the rust from the stud, and placing a jack here to apply pressure so the stud doesn't move while trying to remove the nut. Remove the two 19mm strut knuckle bolts and nut, as well as the 17mm nuts holding the ball joint in place. So the knuckle is off the vehicle. Now let's try to remove the wheel hub by taking the bearing apart. Taking it apart requires this piece of bearing that will be left on the wheel hub to be cut off, and I will show you how to do that. Heating this may allow the hub to slide out of the bearing. That's what I did for the hub on the other side of the vehicle and it came off easily, so trying to heat this up before knocking the hub out might do the trick. I will try a large socket and a hammer to knock the bearing apart. This side fits well. I will lay it on my leg here and hit the hub from the back side here. If you can find a safer way by putting pads on your legs, please do. Having a hydraulic press would make this so easier. I will carefully hit the socket until the hub falls out. It's out. Now let's remove this piece left on this. If you buy a new hub, you won't need to do this. I'll use this cutoff tool here, then use a hammer and wedge to crack it here. I'll show you what I mean. Try not to cut the hub, but if you scar a bit of it, it's fine. Ensure that you wear safety glasses and gloves. Having this on a bench vise is ideal. That's good enough. Do not try to cut it right through. That little scar is fine. I'll use this wedge to crack it open, then it will slide right off. Take a look at the crack right here. Now it can be easily removed. Now it's time to press out what is left of the old bearing and press in the new bearing. Doing that on the vehicle is best if you do not have a hydraulic press. The knuckle is back on the vehicle and it's time to remove the bearing retainer clips. These can be seized up, so apply penetrating oil and try to knock it around to get it moving before try to remove it. I'll use this here tool, but using hammer and chisel works well. Once the snap ring is shifting around, you can now use a snap ring tool and a flat screwdriver to remove the snap ring. The snap ring is out and this is reusable. Now I will use this press kit to press out the old bearing. I just need to use a small piece at the back to drive it forward inside this cup. I will use a socket at the back and one to the front to stop the bolts from moving. Only this large nut should be turning. I find that starting manually and finish with a power tool is best. So while I'm tightening, the bearing is pushing out. You can see the bearing coming out here. Now I can finish with the power tool. The bearing is out and I will clean up this rust before pressing in the new bearing. This is the new bearing just taken from the freezer. Ensure that this magnetic side goes in to come in contact with the brake sensor at the other end. Now, when pressing in the new bearing, it's important to press from the outer part of the bearing here. So I will use this fitting at the back, which is larger than the bearing itself, so it doesn't come in contact with the new bearing. I will use this part of the older damaged bearing to press in the new bearing because it fits perfectly around the circumference of the new bearing. They are the same size. Pressing in the new bearing should be done without power tools, so I will take my time to press it in. Continue until it can't go any further. It's all the way in, so I can now install the snap ring. I will apply some anti-seize to this and use the snap ring pliers to reinstall it. Ensure that it seats properly, so tap it around to ensure that. Now it's time to reinstall the wheel hub by pressing it in place. It's important when reinstalling the new hub to press it on the inner section only to not damage the wheel bearing. So I will use a very small fitting at the back that will only come in contact with the small inner portion of the bearing. I'll press in the hub at the front. I'll continue until it can't be pressed in anymore. That's it. Most of the job here is actually done. But let's finish up. I need to remove the strut bolts to reinstall the axle back in the knuckle. Ensure that the axle goes through and secure with the new axle nut. But sometimes the old nut can be reused. This will be torqued to 145 foot-pounds at the end. This part of the axle nut will need to be crimped with a wedge and hammer. Install the strut bolts and torque to 110 foot-pounds. Install the outer tie rod end and torque to 70 foot-pounds. Please remember to install the quarter pin. Torque the ball joint nuts to 55 foot-pounds. I'll use this power tool to tighten the nut a bit, then use the torque wrench. Install the rotor with screws. This impact screwdriver is ideal. Install the brake caliper and torque to 70 foot-pounds. Install the new brake sensor if you are installing a new one, or reconnect the old one. I will add a little anti-seize to this new one. Hopefully it doesn't seize. Install the wheel and torque the nuts to 100 foot-pounds. No, this is just for one side. Do the same for the other wheel bearing, then take the vehicle to get a front wheel alignment. That's it guys, the job is done. But before you go, smash the like button if you found this video helpful, and subscribe to my channel if you have not yet done so. See you on the next one guys.